at least locally here. So I'll go ahead. All right, so partnership leaders, member roundtable. It says APAC go-to-market KPIs. Really, because of my experience, this is very Japan-centric, but I'll try and throw in some APAC knowledge as well. So, little introduction for the benefit of those on the recording. So, Evan Burkowski, I've been in Japan for almost 20 years now, working in digital marketing. Specializing in AI, analytics, conversion optimization, customer experience optimization, CRO world. So I first arrived in Japan with the idea to do an import business, and that became my quite hard to do. So the first business I did in the second year here was an English school, and eventually reached a point of maximum expansion with that. So I co-founded a marketing agency, much more easy to expand. And then that evolved into founding a software startup and a few other companies after that. And then I moved to the agency side. So I worked at a company called eAgency, which was Google's largest solutions partner. So we were providing consulting services around Google Analytics Premium, and that became the 360 suite. And I was the sales manager there. I built a team to sell and service SaaS software, and our primary solution became Optimizely. So I helped them enter the Japanese market and got some firsthand experience about the Silicon Valley style of SaaS sales. Tried to hybridize that and apply it to the Japanese market. After that, I worked at J. Walter Thompson. So that is Japan's oldest foreign ad agency. Got a look at the media world, and we were trying to look at digital transformation from a big data perspective. And then I started using my experience helping companies enter the Japanese market to become a market entry consultant. So I've done that for several companies now, including Parsley, an analytics company, recently acquired by WordPress. And Full Story, and then most recently Dynamic Yield. So Dynamic Yield, initially I helped them enter the Japanese market and then became the country manager. So going on 2 years doing that. So that's given me a look into Japan's very unique ecosystem, both from the vendor side and from the partner side. And I've had the opportunity to work with quite a lot of partners in Japan during that time. As well as throughout Asia Pacific. So although this talk will again be very Japan-centric because that's my experience, I'll try and talk a little bit about the wider APAC region as well. I have worked, I've closed deals, in Japan, in South Korea, Australia, Taiwan, Hong Kong, Malaysia, and Thailand. So I know a little bit about working in those various markets. And today we're going to talk about Japan, the channel partner ecosystem in Japan, talk about commonly tracked partner KPIs, some recommended KPIs, cultural considerations for selling in this region, and a little bit about Japan-centric sales processes. Just thought I'd share some knowledge because this is what I know the most about. And then general business culture right now in this post-pandemic world, or with Corona, as it's called in Japan. Right, so first a little bit about the ecosystem in this region. And before I get right into this, I'll just talk a little bit about the wider region. So one thing that I've found, a lot of software companies, and another caveat, my experience has been very much in the SaaS world, so I will be focused mostly on the SaaS business model, but it applies to the wider software and IT market, and then to quite a few other industries and types of business models when entering this region. But one thing that I've really found working in this region is that a lot of companies try to take a sort of regional hub approach, which is they'll open an APAC office in somewhere, whether that be Singapore, Tokyo, or Sydney. They'll try and create a regional hub to service the entire region. And for the most part, I actually don't recommend doing that. I've analyzed a lot of companies who've tried to enter this region, and whether they're selling through partners or selling direct, the results are generally the same. It's such a wide region. There's so much linguistic and cultural fragmentation that without getting a solid foothold in each market first, it's very difficult to manage from a single hub. Dynamic Yield had a similar experience, and this pretty much follows the pattern. There was a Singapore office going back several years, but it was very hard to service the entire region. So what I do recommend is picking your largest market. That's often Australia first because of the common language. Australia is generally considered the next market to test after North America because the culture is very similar to North America. So a lot of companies will start their office there. If you can get a foot in the ground and build a good partner ecosystem there, that's a good place to do it. Increasingly, Singapore is more attractive due to tax incentives and, again, English competency. And sometimes, depending on your business or your customer base, somewhere like Tokyo can be a good place as well. So you start with a good market where you can get enough customers to support a team locally. I will say one thing, although I'm a big fan of Singapore and I think business is very easy to do there, Singapore is a very small market. So if you're actually selling to the Singapore market, most of the other companies located in Singapore are also regional hubs. So there isn't actually that much of a large domestic market, especially for B2B or enterprise level SaaS software. So it's often better to start somewhere like Japan. Now this is the strategy that I recommend for a company like Dynamic Yield or for most of the companies I've worked with. Start where your largest potential market is, and if you do a good total addressable market analysis, that should tell you where you're able to start or where you naturally create your first partnerships. That's where you probably want to start. So one reason why this presentation is so Japan-centric, in addition to my personal experience, it's also because I find Japan is a good place to start in this region. It is the largest actual enterprise software market in Asia Pacific, and it is the third largest SaaS market in the world. All right, so the specifics about the channel partner ecosystem here. A lot of these are just the basics, but I'm sort of outlining them for anybody who might be new to this world. You've got your referral partners, solutions partners, reseller partners, agencies, and consultancies. So referral partners in Japan, this can be very important. Most business in this region, and this goes for I would say Chinese-speaking cultures as well as South Korea and perhaps the wider region, things are very much relationship-based. So it can be very valuable to get a referral. Often referral partners are consultants or just well-connected people, often who are late stage in their career. They've worked for a long time at somewhere, they've built a vast personal network, and those personal relationships open doors. For example, I know a couple of people at Dentsu who are now in their 60s or 70s, but they could pick up the phone and call pretty much anybody in Japan and get a meeting. So these type of door openers are very valuable, extremely valuable for getting initial introductions. However, that's usually all they do. They'll get you an initial meeting, but they have no ability to follow up or to help you go through all of the stages to close a deal. It really is just that initial referral, and that's all that they do, and they do specialize on it and do that very well. But if you want follow-up, you probably need to work with a solutions partner. So solutions partners obviously provide services. They provide consulting services and solutions and support for technology in a region like Japan where people don't speak that much English. They can provide your first level of support in Japanese. So they're like a bridge. They'll take all of your various customer inquiries and frequently asked questions and support issues and then pass them on to an English-speaking team at HQ. Often solutions partners are able to sell to their existing network. They may provide or they may represent other software They may have other consulting services, so they can sell to their existing network and sell to their customers who are using software that may be complementary to yours. So that's a cross-sell or an upsell. They're usually able to both open and close the deals. They'll have actual marketing staff to create an inbound funnel and SDRs to follow up with it, as well as account executives or sales directors to work the deal cycle. And they may have some outbound business capability as well, although that's usually limited to reaching out to their existing network and again, cross-selling or upselling to that network. They can assist with marketing efforts in terms of doing webinars, localizing content, doing press releases, creating case studies, and so on in the local language. And of course, this is very important across APAC. Then you've got your reseller partners. So reseller partners, they tend to take ownership of the deal and the customer relationship. With a good reseller partner, they may manage the entire relationship, and rather than co-selling, you may not even have much contact with the end customer. They are often the most able to drive sales. They're incentivized. I usually have structured reseller partner deals with about I would say an industry average of about 25 up to 35% commission on the first year ARR. So whether you're doing that as a discount on list price, and then the agency may mark that back up again and provide their services on top of that, they're incentivized by this deal commission to do all of the hard work and to hire the necessary people to run sales. However, there is a limitation in Japan, and I find that this is common to all partner types. They're excellent farmers. They're able to do excellent account management, get you through the very long deal cycle in Japan, keep the customers happy. But they are almost, without exception, very poor hunters, which means that they're not really able to go out and get new deals. They're not really able to go out and make new relationships. Even a reseller partner incentivized by a large part of deal commission is going to have culturally a very hard time going out and talking to people that they don't know at all. They have to sell to their existing network, or they have to get a personal referral to someone in order to start a new conversation. And this is certainly very true in Japan. I've seen it to be very true in South Korea as well, but I think it's, again, it's pretty common to the wider Asia-Pacific world, is that it's just hard to get past all of the cultural barriers to talk to someone that you don't know or that you don't have a friend to introduce you to. For this reason, a hybrid model, a co-selling model, or even a direct sales model can often be the most effective way to get new business, because if you have bilingual, multicultural sales staff who've been trained in a more Western hunter-type model, whether that be hunting with nets or spears, going out and creating a new relationship is something that people are able to do if they're not completely entrenched in the local culture, if they're not so native that they're sort of beholden to the cultural norms. With a little bit of an international team, it's a lot easier to go out and start new conversations, start new relationships, and get your sales going that way. All right, now agencies, this might actually be sort of Japanese English. I've been in Japan so long, sometimes I forget what is native English and what isn't. But when we say agency in Japan, we're usually talking about media agencies. And certainly in Japan, because these companies own so much of the market, they are the gorilla in the room, as it were. Now, the entire media agency world in Japan is currently undergoing a massive transition. So the three big silos are, number one, Dentsu. That's the single largest ad agency in Japan. And I think the Dentsu Aegis network, Dentsu International, is still the largest media agency in the world. So number two is Hakuhodo. They've always been the number two to Dentsu's number one. So they try very hard. They're often a very good partner to have because they, as the underdog, they try so hard. And then ADK, DK, they're the third sort of silo. And almost every other agency, even consulting agencies or systems integrator, is somehow aligned with those three silos. When I worked at E-Agency, we were aligned with the ADK silo, and so when I first started, there wasn't actually an outbound sales culture because all of the work came down the pipeline from ADK. It was all referrals within this single silo, and that's how most agencies do business in Japan. But again, it is changing because the consulting world is coming and eating so much of the traditional media agency pie that they have to get more competent at their consulting services, the value-added services. So the old business model, of course, was ad placements, taking a commission on creative or media placement. That's no longer enough. So now it's often not just acquisition, but also conversion optimization, making sure that the ad campaigns are accountable, that they're actually showing an ROI. And of course, this requires the digital world to show ROI on media spend. So it's kind of dragging them, these agencies, kicking and screaming out of their comfort zone in the TV world into the digital world. Now, of course, again, this is very Japan-centric, but Japan has like 6 or maybe 7 terrestrial TV channels, and they own everything. Every with such a limited number of channels, everybody in Japan watches the same few TV channels, and so they're all seeing the same advertising. And companies like Dentsu, they just absolutely own, almost to the level of thought control of the populace, this world. So it's very hard for them to shift out of it. They're lagging behind in their digital transformation for this reason. In some ways, they see the online world as cannibalizing their traditional TV world and print media world, but things are changing out of necessity. And this is partly because of the global agencies, the foreign global agencies in Japan that are leading this charge. So Wunderman Thompson, I think it was last year or the year before, the merger between J. Walter Thompson, where I used to work, and Wunderman has created the new combined agency. Wunderman Thompson Commerce is increasingly very strong in this region. And then the traditional, their sort of cohorts like Publicis, Merkle, and so on. Merkle being more and more a consultancy rather than a media company. So the other consultancies. In Japan, Transcosmos is very strong. They actually started in the call center world. So they used to do outsourced, basically answering the phones. And then they got into outsourced website management, website creation, and now they're into conversion optimization, personalization, and so on. And then there are other companies like GapRise who specialize in bridging the market between Japan and other nations, especially Israeli startups. Adflex and Principal, these are all agencies that I've worked with. And then the big ones like Accenture, IMJ, Deloitte, PwC, Nielsen, and so on. So they're moving more and more into the IT world, the MarTech world, with more and more analytics and big data. And then the systems integrators. So this, again, is unique to Japan, but I've come across it in Taiwan and Hong Kong and some other markets as well. But especially in Japan, the systems integrator world is extremely fragmented. We don't see many global systems integrators in Japan. Instead, we see thousands, tens of thousands of small niche companies, just incredibly fractured. There's a culture in Japan of outsourcing to these companies, and that's one reason why almost everybody outsources to them, and so it supports a large number of them. But there's no standardization. They all try to do custom development, and they all they're very protectionist, so they try and lock their customers into their legacy systems. These are almost always boxed software systems, not SaaS. So customers are very often trapped in legacy systems that are several years out of date, And so if you're trying to sell SaaS in Japan, you have to be aware of this, because you'll often get trapped on something like a CMS that's hasn't been updated for 10 years, and the PHP version is way out of date, and the database doesn't work correctly, and so on. So you have to be aware of this. It's almost unavoidable. These companies are so entrenched that they often not just build the website and back-end systems, but manage everything as well. And they are the gatekeepers, so they're potentially very useful allies as well. Because if you want to sell new software into this market, often they are the decision makers, or at least the stakeholders. Now, the channel partner ecosystem in general, in this market, it's good for priming the pump. I wouldn't say that a partner sales model should be your only strategy. A good channel partner, it helps prime the pump, it gets the initial flywheel spinning, but it's not enough to build a self-sustaining sales engine. Ultimately, you have to build a co-selling model, or you have to build eventually a direct sales model. And this has been the case time and time again. If you look at Oracle and Salesforce and Marketo, all of the large, especially SaaS companies that have entered the Japanese market, this is always the case. They'll often work with a channel partner for the first few years, but eventually they outgrow the usefulness of that partnership, or they need to, even if they maintain the partnership for many years, and that happens as well, they do ultimately have to build their own direct sales engine. Now, this is partly, again, because channel partners are so often great account managers, great farmers, but not very good hunters. In order to grow the market beyond the personal network that the channel partner already owns, you very often have to build your own direct sales model. And the only way to do that is with a hybrid model that takes the best of the sort of Western, very incentivized, commission-based sales model, and hybridizes that with the Japanese model. And we'll talk more about that in a slide or two. So again, you're able to get a good head start with a good channel partner ecosystem. So for the first year or two, it's always the best way to get into the market. They're leveraging their existing relationships. Again, they're cross-selling. They're packaging your tech with existing tech and wrapping their support services around it to create a very easily marketable package. And they can assist with the localization, the translation, which is a huge lift. It's very difficult to localize your site and your marketing materials and your sales process and your inbound lead gen, everything into the local languages. So having a good partner to assist with all this is essential. All right, so what sort of KPIs should you be tracking once you get a good partner network set up? Well, some commonly tracked partner KPIs are just how many partners you have in the region. And obviously, it's good to have a few key partners. But this metric, number of partners in the region, that alone doesn't really tell us anything. So you might spend a lot of time in your first year or two signing up, 5 partners or 10 partners, and HQ may feel that this is making progress. But it's not always the most effective use of time. First of all, it takes a very long time to sign up partners in this region. Just localizing your partner agreements and getting through the legal process can take 6 months to a year to longer in some cases. So it can often be more effective to focus on developing a few very meaningful, deep partner relationships with partners who have either a very targeted network or a big enough network that they can drive a lot of sales volume. So you're not, essentially running dry in the first year or two, but there's enough potential to get you through a couple of years at least. So another commonly tracked metric is deal registrations. Yeah, so sure, it's good to track how many deals you're registering. And this can be through both inbound and outbound sales activities. But again, not very meaningful without insight into how many touch points does it take to close these deals, what's the overall time to close, what are your overall close rates per salesperson, and so on. So just the number of deal registrations, it often isn't enough without these more ancillary metrics to give you insight. And again, in your first year or two, you have to be aware of this initial partner spike that you're going to get when a partner first signs up. They almost always drive an initial spike during that first 6 months to a year because they're just cross-selling. But after that spike, it can often completely plateau because, again, they've just run their network dry and they're not able to go out and hunt and create new leads. Another metric that's commonly tracked would be revenue via partners. If you're making money, that's good. But it's most meaningful when it's accurately tied to attribution, so you can see how much runway you have, how much future there is with this partner, and their overall marketing effectiveness, i.e. can they continue to generate revenue? Then another common KPI is the number of people trained and certified. This can be a good metric because it indicates how committed they are. If they're not getting anybody trained or certified on your tech, it's it's not likely that they're ever going to be successful. But you could get 200 people trained, and if you never actually close a deal, then it's meaningless. So sure, it's good to track how many people are trained, but it's most meaningful when it's actually tied to win rates. All right, so more recommended partner KPIs. These are some of the KPIs that both I found personally and my mentors have told me, and my research has shown me to be more effective. So first of all, partner engagement. Are they regularly logging into the partner portal? Whether that be some software that you're using, like a bridged Salesforce or something like that, or just a Google Sheet where you're tracking deals. Are they logging in every day or every week at least and registering what's going on in the pipeline? Are they completing training in a reasonable amount of time? Are they registering both the leads that they're generating from their marketing activities and how the deals are going? So as well as actual meaningful metrics like the number of touch points, the time to close, what type of conversations they're having. Are they emailing more? Are they phoning? Or is it all Zoom calls? What exactly are the metrics they're using? And then partner capabilities. So this is a good KPI because you want to know if they can both sell, create new business, and retain that business. If their churn rate is too high, obviously it's not valuable. So you look for ways to measure their pre-sales, their technical sales competency, their ability to implement correctly, onboard, support, and then get to the renewal. One thing I've found in this region is that a lot of partners, especially the sort of aggressive partners who will reach out for a relationship, they tend to be the underdogs. They're usually number 2 or 3 in their field, and so they're more aggressive and they're looking for foreign companies to partner with. But this often means that they're very small and they may not have the necessary resources to actually do full technical implementation and consulting. Or they'll often say that they can, and then it turns out that they have to outsource it. So they're working as part of a team. They'll work with another systems integrator, or they'll work with an outsourced development company or something like that. So it's good to evaluate, whether they actually have the capabilities to not just sell, but also, onboard, train, maintain, and support. All right, then marketing effectiveness. This is a good KPI. Can they engage in both solo and joint marketing activities, which lead to a good percentage of meetings booked? And can they do this consistently beyond just the first year? And are they continuing to invest in generating localized case studies? So it's not just a matter of getting new deals, it's a matter of publicizing them and then making sure that you're creating good case studies so that you can get referrals. Again, this is kind of Japan-centric, but I've found it to be pretty true across the entire region. Word of mouth, perception, what people are actually saying about your product is absolutely essential. One single negative perception is like 100 times stronger than positive. So it's very important to get localized case studies. I've always said there's a rule in Japan that it doesn't matter how good your case study is. If it didn't happen in Japan, it didn't happen. Japan is just so different from the rest of the world that if you haven't had a success story that worked in this market, they assume it's just not going to work for this market. So it's very important to get local case studies. And then it's good to measure customer satisfaction with your partners. So you can do independent Net Promoter Scores, or you can do independent surveys, or just talk with your customers. Find out if you've got the right partner matched with the right customer. And sometimes this isn't the case, and it's often good if you've created a large enough partner network for the region that you have multiple options. It's often good to go to a prospect, especially if you're generating leads through your own efforts. Go to the prospect and ask which partner they would like to work with. Say maybe they've worked with this media partner before for some acquisition. Maybe they've worked with this partner for some consulting or CRO. Let them choose who they feel most comfortable working with, because often, certainly this is the case in Japan, but across the wider region as well, if it's a large enough partner, they'll have worked with your customer, and that customer will most likely have worked with some other potential partners as well, and they'll know who they're comfortable working with. Okay, so I'll go now to a bit more Japan-centric. Again, this is my area of expertise, so this is where I can talk to the most. But many of these are applicable to the wider region as well. So obviously, trust is key. Again, the traditional Japanese sales process is entirely relationship-based. It is extremely high touch, very important to have regular contact. Again, referrals and word of mouth are essential. And you have to develop and maintain relationships over years and years. And this means, going for dinner with your customers and with your partners, going for drinks. Obviously, drinking is still a big part of business across all of APAC. And I think it will be even post-COVID when we're going back to shops again, because it's just a part of the culture that it's very hard to speak directly, partly because of social hierarchies, whether they be seniority or age-based or what have you. It's just very, very difficult to have a frank and open conversation unless there's the excuse of, oh, I'd been having a couple of drinks. So it's really funny. I've seen time and time again when I've gone for dinner with my Japanese colleagues or coworkers or customers, we'll all sit down. It's still a very formal and stuffy atmosphere. Everybody's got their tie on and stuff. You'll sit down, the drinks will come, you'll do the kanpai, the cheers, and the person that you want to talk to will have like one sip of their beer, lean back and like, oh, okay, I'm drunk, now we can talk. And then they'll talk frankly. It's funny, after just one sip, they have this cultural excuse. And often what they're trying to say is what they couldn't say directly in a meeting. And this can be absolutely essential because the way most meetings are held in this region is you've got a lot of people in the meeting. It's often a lot of junior people and then mid-level management and senior management stakeholders, and you don't necessarily know who is what position, who is the most senior person in the room. And they often won't talk, and sometimes they'll even look like they're asleep or literally be asleep. And the junior people have to carry the meeting. Also, it'll seem like a meeting might go on for 2 hours and a lot be said, but you come out of the meeting not knowing what the decision was, what the consensus was, or what the people on the other side of the table are even thinking. So you have to have a champion or a stakeholder that you can follow up with to find out what people were actually thinking. Because of the very strong groupthink culture in the region, people just don't want to speak their opinion. They certainly don't want to be the only one speaking their opinion. So they'll wait and they'll do some consensus building back at the office, or sort of reading the air and looking for nonverbal cues and stuff to find out what the whole team thinks. And then as a team, they'll come to a general consensus. And if you've got a good champion, you can follow up with that person, usually over dinner or drinks, to find out what actually happened in that meeting and how their side actually feels. Now, this is changing because, of course, during a pandemic, you can't meet up for drinks and get this inside track on what your contact is thinking and feeling. So that has shifted more to like instant messenger. If you've managed to connect on WhatsApp, or the Japanese equivalent would be Line, or I'm forgetting the other one, WeChat, or whatever these are, or Facebook Messenger. If you've got a direct contact line to your champion, you can often message them afterwards and have a more frank conversation. So I always try to get an instant messenger contact, and then try to follow up, within that day or later that night or a day or two later to find out what was actually going on. And that's where you find out what the actual consensus was. All right, so part of this consensus building necessity leads to a very long sales cycle, easily 3 times that of the USA or EMEA. And this is partly because of a culture of very much preparation. Things are very process-based, so it's often like 80% preparation, 20% execution, which is often the inverse of the Western model, where we want to feel like we can, do most of the work on the fly and then work out a few details as we get to it as necessity arises. But certainly in Japan, people want to be as process-based as possible. They want to mitigate risk. And so a very long preparation cycle, whether it's going through the legal process or going through every possible permutation of a contract and what might go wrong, that can take months and months. It can even take years. But once all of that work is done, they'll sign and expect implementation to happen like immediately. So, a very long process, and then all of a sudden things are going very, very slowly. All of a sudden they'll go very, very quickly. So you have to be ready for that. When it's go time, you have to move quickly. Now, again, part of the reason why it's like 80% preparation is because internal alignment is key. All stakeholders have to sign off. In Japan, they have to literally sign off. They have to stamp a consensus document, which is called a ringisho, which means the circle document. So basically, it goes around. It's a document that's printed up, whether it be a purchase order or a contract or a hiring decision, or even the smallest, sort of most insignificant seeming things. Every potential stakeholder attached to that decision, and even people who it seems have no attachment to the decision, but just out of tradition have to be included, this document is literally put on their desk, and they have to literally sign off on it on these chops that are created, inkan. And everybody signs, and if there's a single dissenting person, then it gets held up. So, if Tanaka's out on holiday or sick or something, that document sits on his desk until he comes back and physically signs it. This is changing. Actually, this morning's news article is that 99% of these stamp requiring policies are going to be eliminated at the government level. And this is partly driven by the pandemic, because this paper-based workflow was preventing people from being able to do remote work. So it's changing, but it'll be decades probably before it's completely gone. And there will always be this stakeholder alignment necessity. Now, this is partly because decision-making in this culture is always done by committee in order to mitigate the risk to individuals. And this is because of the way that career advancement happens, specifically in Japan. But I've seen this across APAC as well. So a Japanese manager gets ahead in their career by mitigating risk, by never taking any personal responsibility. The reason is because HR is structured in such a way that when somebody starts their career, even if they're a fresh university graduate, age 22 or whatever it is, they basically start on day one not knowing anything, but they've got 100 points. And throughout their career, they can only ever lose points. They can't win points back. So you start with 100, and every time you make a mistake, you lose a point. The only way to get ahead is not make any mistakes, and then by doing as little as possible, by staying in the company as long as possible, you're promoted because of seniority. Whoever has, the least amount of mistakes after 40 years becomes chairman of the organization. It's the inverse again of the Western system, where on day one you start with 0, you don't know anything, and you try to win points. And if you make a mistake, you lose points, but you can come up with a good idea or take some risk and win points back. And you can sometimes get to 100 quite young and become the CEO of the company at still quite a young age. This is, because of in Japanese culture, the group is so important that the group is always considered wiser and more intelligent and more correct than the individual. No matter how genius the individual might be, it's not possible that that person could be smarter than the group. So you always have group-based decisions. Yeah, cultural issue. So design by committee, decision-making by committee is always preferred. Group is always, again, smarter than the individual. Harmony and teamwork are the ultimate goal, to the point that this is reality, certainly in Japan. Whatever is most harmonious is the reality. All right, so this leads us to the Japan sales processes. The sales methodology in Japan right now, it's kind of unfortunate, but there's not a good culture of sales training. There used to be. When Japan was going through its economic miracle and rising to power, and companies had a lot of budget for training people, until about the mid-90s, training was pretty good. There were actual sales coaches, and there would be a well-structured methodology for training salespeople. But when the bubble economy collapsed, training was one of the first things to get cut. And so most organizations today, they basically just do on-the-job training where you shadow a senior salesperson and try and learn from them. Unfortunately, most salespeople are not good trainers because, for the most part, the veterans, the ones who are really good, they've figured out how to sell through their own unique formulas, their own personal relationships, their own scripts, their own strategies, and they don't want to give it away. They want to retain their status as being a good salesperson. So they don't really want to teach that to anybody else. And there isn't a good coaching, and there isn't really a structure of having like a sales manager or a vice president of sales in most Japanese companies. It's usually a very flat system, kind of every man for themselves. And traditionally, there was a very high turnover in sales, so you just didn't have very many professional people. There isn't really a culture of data-driven sales, so CRM, measuring metrics, tracking how many touch points it takes to close a deal. The core basic fundamentals of a good data-driven sales process, they still don't really exist in Japan. It's much more relationship-based. Again, everybody just figuring out what works for themselves. There also isn't usually a culture of commission. So usually no individual quotas or incentives. Bonuses are tied to the overall team or company performance. So it's not like salespeople are getting a commission. They're usually getting a salary. And then if they do really well, they might get an individual bonus at the end of the year, or maybe twice a year at certain set seasons. But more often it's their group, their division, or the entire company. So you might be the best performing salesperson in the entire company. You could be 10 times better than the next salesperson and still not get a bonus or get any incentive, be no different than anybody else in the company. So it's kind of de-incentivizing for the hunter type of sales process that is actually very successful in the West. It's much more incentivizing for the farmer type of model, the account manager model, where you take your time and you develop good relationships with your client base, and you don't risk anything that would damage those relationships, or even risk creating new relationships because it's just not in your best interest. There are exceptions, and these are usually the global companies that have a foreign presence. So when I'm looking to hire, I'll look for salespeople who have done some time at either Oracle, Salesforce, SAP, or Microsoft. I find that they have the best training systems. They tend to put out the best salespeople who are then successful and go on to top tier careers at other companies. And this is because it's a hybrid system. It's a hybrid of the Western incentive-based system with the Japanese relationship-based system. So if you can crack that formula and create a good hybrid model, then you'll likely do pretty well. Obviously, it's absolutely essential to localize all sales materials and present them in Japanese. English is taught for minimum 6 years. Everybody can read English, but nobody's that comfortable with it unless they've spent time living overseas. And increasingly, Japan is becoming, as the pendulum has swung away from globalism, like many other nations, it's more inward looking right now. So even the young generation isn't, traveling overseas that much. English is just not really that spoken. Western processes, although if they're necessary for business, they're respected. They're not something that most people are investing in. So you can't be presenting materials in English. Even graphs and charts and images, you have to get access to the original files so that you can edit those and localize them. And also, there's a culture in Japan of providing as much dense information as possible. There's something about this culture that just abhors white space. So you have to use PowerPoint. You have to use like 10 or 12 point font and fill up your slides. Just absolutely the complete opposite of what would be recommended in a Western presentation model. You have to put all your information on the slides. You have to allow people to read them as you yourself are reading off the slides. Don't just put up a picture and tell a story about it. You have to have everything written out. That's the expectation. That's how it's done in this market. It's weird, but that's how it's done, and it makes for just horribly ugly slides. But that's what they want. When it comes to the actual sales pitch, risk mitigation is always the strongest pitch. In sales, we talk about away positioning and towards positioning. Towards being moving towards an opportunity. Here's more market share. Here's a cost reduction or something you can get. In Japan, that moving towards something never works because that's risky. You have to talk about moving away from risk mitigation. No one ever wants to be first, so you've got to leverage a personal relationship to get someone to be first, and then you've got to play that up as much as possible, create as much social proof as you can. Again, case studies are essential, and they must be localized into Japanese. All right, so those are the main points. Now, things are changing so much because of the pandemic. Obviously, it's now no longer in-person meetings. It's a Zoom workflow. People are getting used to this. It's taken a year. I would say that some people are still, even after a year, still waiting to get back to normal, so they've done nothing. A lot of companies, they've just put everything on pause and they're waiting until work gets back to normal. But it's not ever going to get back to normal the way it was. So we're always going to have this new reality. In Japanese, it's called with Corona. That has become the key word. And sort of forward-thinking companies are getting used to this. So Zoom or Teams or Meet or whatever it is that allows you to get access, that's become the standard. People are remote working. And this does actually break down some cultural barriers. There are fewer gatekeepers now, so you can get more access to key decision makers and stakeholders. So although you were slowed down by the need to get people on a Zoom call and the technological issues associated with that, we're also kind of conversely sped up because there are fewer gatekeepers now. Phoning doesn't work so much. Everybody's remote working. You can call into the office and you're just going to get an answering machine. It's not like people are forwarding their office number to their home or their mobile number. For the most part, the phone isn't really working so well right now. So email or webinar, just trying to get people on a Zoom meeting is most important. Manners, of course, are still essential, more so in this market than probably any other region on the planet. You do have to follow basic protocols, so be very careful about understanding if somebody's older than you, if they have more seniority than you or not. You don't have to go through the whole bowing and exchanging of meishi or business cards. That's not so much required, but respect is absolutely essential. If you're on time for a meeting in Japan, you're late. You've always got to be 5 minutes early. If you're too early, it's bad manners. It's a faux pas. If you're more than 5 minutes early, you're late. Always 5 minutes on the dot. That's when you have to log in and start your Zoom call. So give yourself a buffer between Zoom calls. Now also keep in mind the expectation is that if it's an actual meeting, it's going to be an hour long. There's no 30-minute meetings or 45-minute meetings in Japan. So you pretty much have to either juggle things really well or maybe have an assistant. If you've got back-to-back Zoom calls, you've got to get somebody to start the call for you 5 minutes early, and then you get onto the call, or you just space your calls out more than an hour apart and schedule other tasks in between. Now, conversely, as foreigners, don't ever try to be too Japanese. It's more effective. It breaks down more barriers and it allows you to be more efficient if you are just yourself. Obviously, knowing the culture is helpful. Knowing Japanese is helpful. But Japanese especially are very forgiving of foreigners. We're not held to the same standards. And so we can actually get away with quite a lot. And that allows us to be actually more efficient. All right, so we're 1 minute before the end. We've got a little time for Q&A. I think, Gilad, you're still the only person on the call, so it's a good chance for you. Any comments or questions about these slides?
Well, not more than I ask you on a regular day, but
Yeah.
no, everything is pretty clear, and thank you for the time and for all this great information.
Well, I hope it was helpful for everybody. Again, I created a local QuickTime screen recording here, so hopefully that works all right, and I'll share that with partnership leaders. But yeah, if anybody has any questions, feel free to reach out to me at any time. It's evan.burkowski@gmail.com, or just message me through the Partnership Leaders Slack channel. All right, thanks. Have a good day, everyone.
Bye, Evan, you too.
All right, thanks, Glad. Bye-bye.